The humid morning in Ouagadougou carried a strange stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. Guards outside the presidential compound straightened as a tall man approached with a briefcase, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression composed yet urgent. He walked past security checkpoints with credentials that bore the insignia of the United Nations, every stamp in its proper place, every detail aligned. When he entered President Ibrahim Traoré's office, he carried himself with the confidence of someone certain he would be obeyed. Introducing himself as Dr. Michael Harrison, a senior UN weapons inspector dispatched on emergency orders, his voice carried the precise cadence of practiced authority, each word designed to sound irrefutable. Yet beneath the quiet ritual of this performance, narration makes clear that Traoré already knew this man was not who he claimed to be. For days he had been waiting, aware that the real Dr. Harrison was resting in Geneva under discreet protection, unaware that his identity had been stolen and weaponized. The office itself seemed to resist the intruder. Heavy curtains trapped the heat, shadows clung to the edges of the room, and the sound of the city outside was muffled as though history itself had stopped to listen. The inspector laid down his documents, sliding them across the desk with polished assurance. The paper, the seals, the carefully rehearsed urgency, all of it was too perfect, crafted for deception rather than truth. Traoré studied him in silence, his face unreadable, while the man mistook his composure for intimidation. The arrogance of power disguised as professionalism lingered in the air like smoke, mixing with the faint scent of polished wood. Then came the first words, sharp in their brevity, weighted with false concern. "Mr. President, this is a matter of utmost urgency. We must act before the world finds out." The silence that followed was not hesitation, but strategy. Traoré, with the patience of someone who had prepared every countermeasure, finally spoke with calm restraint, each syllable carrying the force of dignity. "Then let us act together. Burkina Faso has nothing to hide." His tone revealed nothing of the storm building beneath, nothing of the weeks of surveillance, counterintelligence, and meticulous planning that had led to this moment. Narration slows to trace the unspoken duel of perception unfolding across the desk. To the inspector, this was submission, a leader reluctantly bowing under scrutiny. But to Traoré, this was the theater of entrapment, a stage upon which every false step would be documented. His mind recalled the encrypted communications intercepted, the meetings held in shadowed rooms, the decision to allow this man entry so that his handlers abroad could be exposed along with him. Every gesture now was deliberate, a move in a game already won before it began. The tension in the room thickened as the inspector leaned forward, pressing the urgency of his mission, but his words barely penetrated the wall of silence that Traoré constructed with his presence. The narrator describes the inspector's eyes, glinting with confidence, betraying the certainty of someone who believed he controlled the script. Yet in those very eyes lay the seeds of collapse, for he was too assured, too careless in his belief that a small African nation could not anticipate the trap. Finally, as if closing the curtain on the scene, Traoré leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the full weight of inevitability. "Inspect wherever you wish, but remember, truth leaves traces." The words hung in the air like an unspoken verdict, leaving the inspector momentarily frozen, unaware that he had already stepped into a snare woven with patience, foresight, and the quiet certainty of a man who had known all along. The silence that followed Traoré's calm invitation carried forward like an echo. But beneath that quiet assurance lay weeks of unseen preparation, a web spun with patience. Narration pulls the reader backward into the darkened rooms beneath the presidential palace where the true story had begun. 2 weeks earlier, a coded transmission slipped across secure CIA channels was intercepted mid-flight, a string of meaningless characters to most, but to the eyes of Dr. Aminata Sawadogo, the young cryptographer who had left MIT to return home, it was a puzzle begging to be solved. Within hours, the letters dissolved into meaning. Operation Sandstorm authorized, identity stolen, evidence package prepared. It was not an inspection at all, but a staged intervention waiting to be justified by a lie. The knowledge dropped like lead in that underground chamber, the only light flickering from a single bulb above a table where Traore, his intelligence chief Colonel Kashaw, Foreign Minister Cabaret, and Captain Drago listened in grim silence. The anger came swift and sharp. Cabaret slammed his hand against the table, his voice low but searing. Expose it now. Call the UN, call the media. Let the world know what they plan. But Traore, hands folded, eyes steady, cut through the fury with deliberate calm. No. If we expose them early, they will deny, replace the actor, and return with a cleaner face. Let him walk through the door. Let him believe he succeeds. We will give him rope enough to hang not just himself, but those who sent him. The room exhaled a silence heavier than anger, the silence of strategy over impulse, restraint over rage. Narration widens to show why the stakes burned so deep. This was not the first time fabricated evidence had sought to stain the soil of nations. Iraq had been shattered by phantom weapons, Libya torn apart by exaggerated reports, Syria twisted by claims that justified bombs before questions. Each time Africa had watched the pattern, the casual dismissal of truth when truth belonged to smaller nations. It was more than politics, it was a racial wound, a presumption that black nations could be manipulated without resistance, that their voices could be drowned under the roar of foreign narratives. Now the pattern had reached Burkina Faso, but this time the silence would not be submission. Dialogue slips in, precise and weighted. A young officer, voice barely audible in the dark chamber, murmured, "They'll plant the evidence themselves." Traore's reply came without hesitation, iron wrapped in calm. "Then we will record their hands dirty." From that moment, every step the fake inspector took was choreographed by unseen eyes. His arrival at the airport was filmed discreetly, his hotel room disguised with invisible surveillance, capable of reading his laptop from the reflection in his glasses. The first day of inspections unfolded like theater. He was escorted to military depots, storage yards, laboratories, each spotless, each prepared. He found nothing because there was nothing. To him, it was frustration hidden beneath professionalism, but to the watchers, it was confirmation that the mask was slipping. That night, bait was laid in the form of a staged informant. Captain Traoré, unrelated to the president, played the role of a disillusioned officer willing to sell secrets. In a smoky cafe, microphones hidden in walls and cameras tucked into light fixtures captured every word. "There is a facility north of the city," the supposed defector whispered, sliding an envelope across the table. "Weapons from Libya hidden since Gaddafi fell. Tomorrow night I can distract the guards. You'll have 30 minutes. The inspector's eyes lit up, a flicker of triumph he thought no one saw. He clasped the hand of the false informant, his voice tight with suppressed excitement. "I'll be there. Make sure it is clear." Narration tightens the noose. The site had been carefully prepared. An abandoned agricultural storage facility restaged to look ominous. Legal fertilizers lined in suspicious order, agricultural chemicals arranged like contraband, all under the gaze of cameras so small they were part of the dust. Every barrel, every container carried invisible trace markers, evidence designed to cling to the inspector's hands, his clothes, his tools. The following evening unfolded like prophecy. Mitchell arrived with his so-called UN technicians, CIA operatives in borrowed uniforms. Their boots echoed in the empty hall, their gloved hands rifled through harmless containers, their movements all captured by hidden lenses. Frustration brewed as nothing sinister appeared, but then the decisive moment came. Narration slows, frames the scene like a freeze in film. Mitchell's hand slipping into his bag, pulling free a small glass vial filled with chemical residue, not born of Burkina Faso, but carried from a distant laboratory. His face betrayed the thrill of control, the belief he was about to trap a nation. Yet he was the one ensnared, every gesture documented, every particle already betraying him. As the vial touched the ground, the cliffhanger crystallized. Evidence planted beneath cameras, waiting to turn his deception into the very proof of conspiracy. The silence of the abandoned storage site still clung to the air as Mitchell placed the vial among the harmless agricultural chemicals. his gloved hands steady, his face sharpened by the thrill of supposed victory. He photographed the scene with meticulous care, unaware that every click of his camera, every bead of sweat, every breath fogging the air, was captured by lenses hidden in rafters above him. Narration folds the moment into Traoré's command center, where glowing monitors lit the darkness as his closest aides watched the performance unfold in real time. No words were needed there, only the quiet certainty that the trap had closed. Mitchell believed he had cornered a nation, but the truth was already cornering him. The following morning he entered the presidential office once again, this time cloaked in false gravity, his voice modulated into sorrow as he delivered the verdict he had prepared. "Mr. President, we discovered VX nerve agent precursors. This is grave." The words hung like poison, intended to strangle dignity and summon fear. Traoré, unmoved, his eyes locked on Mitchell's, answered with a calm that cracked the mask of theater. "If such poisons are here," he said evenly, "they arrived with you." The inspector blinked, a flicker of unease crossing his features before he quickly suppressed it, mistaking Traoré's composure for denial rather than revelation. Narration pivots outward to describe the next act. Mitchell retreating to his hotel, the blinds drawn, his laptop open, the encrypted uplink engaged. His fingers flew across the keys, assembling the report that would condemn a nation. Photographs embedded, coordinates mapped, fabricated evidence woven into official language. "Chemical weapons program confirmed," he typed. The words that had justified wars in other lands now prepared to unleash the same fate upon Burkina Faso. His handler's voice crackled through the satellite line, distorted by encryption. "Well done. This will move quickly. Secure council action will follow." Yet Mitchell did not know the signal was mirrored, every byte cloned, every word intercepted, every lie prepared to be dismantled by the truth. Then came the release. Like the opening of floodgates, Burkina Faso's intelligence service unveiled their dossier to the world. It began with the intercepted messages authorizing Operation Sandstorm. Then the split-screen footage rolled. On one side, the empty storage facility as it was. On the other, Mitchell planting the vial, his own hands betraying him. Next came the testimony of the real Dr. Harrison speaking from Geneva, confirming he had never left Switzerland, his identity stolen, his name weaponized. Finally, the scientific analysis appeared, proving that the chemical traces matched materials from an American laboratory, not Burkinabe's soil. The world watched, first with disbelief, then with outrage. The revelation too overwhelming to deny. Mitchell, still cloaked in the illusion of control, arrived at the airport believing his mission complete. But the illusion shattered when uniformed officers stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Cameras captured the scene, broadcasting across continents. A CIA officer disguised as a UN inspector, exposed and disgraced. His face, once proud, twisted under the weight of flashes and questions. "Is it true you planted evidence?" Reporters shouted. His lips trembled, his silence louder than denial. In the capital, Traoré faced the press, his posture calm, his words deliberate. A journalist leaned forward, voice sharp with disbelief. "Mr. President, how did you know?" Traoré's answer came like a blade of light through darkness. "Because deception always leaves a shadow. We only had to shine the light." The room erupted with murmurs, the weight of his words landing harder than any accusation. Narration lingers on Mitchell as the walls of denial crumbled. Sweat dampened his collar, his once-practiced smile warped into something hollow. His hands shook as if the handcuffs had reached into his bones. The arrogance that had carried him across borders collapsed under the truth replayed on every screen. He whispered at last, the words slipping like ash from his tongue. "I was following orders. We've done this in dozens of countries." The confession, recorded, echoed louder than a shout, reverberating beyond the walls of custody, indicting not just a man, but a system built on deception. Now collapsing under the weight of exposure, the world did not move on quietly. The moment Mitchell's confession slipped into the open, it spread like fire, carried by every screen and every voice. The footage of him planting the vial rolled endlessly on global broadcasts, the split-screen comparisons dissected in detail by analysts. the words of the real Dr. Harrison replayed as proof of identity theft. Western officials scrambled with denial, their rehearsed statements collapsing as the second and third waves of evidence emerged. The UN convened in emergency session, ambassadors whispering behind closed doors, their confidence shaken by the audacity of the deception. On American streets, chants rose louder than the speeches of politicians, "No more WMD lies." Signs waved in the air, echoing the outrage of a public betrayed once again by narratives built on sand. In Ouagadougou, life continued with the slow rhythm of heat and dust. Yet beneath it all ran the pulse of vindication. Mitchell, stripped of disguise, now sat in a cell where the silence pressed heavier than chains. Narration slows to his figure bent over a small wooden table, staring at the screen replaying his own movements, his gloved hand placing the vial, his triumphant smirk as he believed himself unseen, the moment forever recorded. The weight of exposure hollowed him out more than any verdict. He reached for an old photograph of his daughter, edges frayed from years in his wallet. He wrote letters that remained unanswered, each silence striking harder than interrogation. In the end, it was not Traoré's handcuffs, but abandonment that punished him most. Against this personal unraveling, Traoré's image emerged not as a man of vengeance but of measured restraint. At a press conference, cameras flashing like lightning, he stood tall yet soft-spoken, his words falling with the weight of centuries. How many wars have been started with planted lies? How many nations destroyed by fabricated truth? We do not seek revenge. We seek reform. The hall fell into a hush, reporters frozen by the quiet indictment of a system that had treated deception as currency. His refusal to gloat disarmed cynicism. His call for reform rather than retribution drew respect. Narration stretches outward, framing the wider picture through stark metaphors. At CIA headquarters, an empty chair in a conference room became a silent monument to failure. In African universities, young students crowded into new lecture halls, studying cryptography, intelligence law, and journalism. Their notebooks filled with equations and case studies born not in foreign capitals, but from their own soil. On television screens, journalists held up hard proof instead of speculation, their words checked against evidence rather than whispers. Across continents, the hunter had become the hunted. The deceiver turned into the lesson. The story bends back to where it began, the office where Mitchell first walked in with polished credentials and counterfeit confidence. That room now stood preserved, a monument to vigilance. The same heavy curtains, the same carved desk, the same air still heavy with history. Visitors entered not to see power, but to remember deception's defeat. Traoré, reflecting in private as he had so often done in silence, spoke words that carried the weight of permanence. They sent a lie dressed as truth. We exposed the truth hidden inside the lie. They thought deception was their weapon. We proved that exposure is stronger. His voice, though quiet, seemed to echo through the walls, as though the room itself had taken memory. The narration lingers in its final strokes. The deceiver had been deceived. The hunter had been hunted. The man who believed he carried authority had instead carried his own downfall into the heart of a nation that refused to bend. And in that refusal lay a legacy, proof that even the smallest stage can collapse the grandest deception when patience, vigilance, and dignity guide its players. Ibrahim Traoré had known all along.